A little bit ago, I put out a video on my personal journey of being inducted into the world of video games. I ended that video by talking about how sometimes the most incredible experiences can be the most unexpected and come from the places we never thought to look before. So, it almost feels ironic that so soon after finishing that video, I started a new journey, one that took me by storm in the medium, one that has taken over my mind in the past month or so, with endless theory crafting and newfound joy over discovering a new world. As May of 2025 began to draw to a close, I took my first steps into the mainline Shin Megami Tensei franchise. A little background on this series and my experience with it before now. SMT started as a video game spin off and adaptation of the Japanese novel series Digital Devil Story back in 1987. This was the original Megami Tensei game developed by Atlus for the Famicom. Over time, what many would term the series proper would begin with 1992's Shin Megami Tensei for the Super Famicom, taking the series' roots as an adaptation and gradually becoming its own media behemoth with the same roots and concepts. Eventually, the series would grow to encompass not only the mainline games SMT 1 through 5, but also multiple spin-off series with their own distinct identities. In fact, the first game I played in the overarching SMT media series was one of these spin-offs, a part of the Persona subseries. The Persona games have grown so much in popularity since its conception that many even consider it a separate franchise at this point, similar to how SMT itself branched off from the novels it was originally based on. I personally started the series with 2019's Persona 5 Royal, as I'm sure is the case for many others due to its popularity. I then worked my way back with Persona 4 Golden and Persona 3 Portable, and even read the manga adaptation of the original Persona 1. The Persona 2 duology of Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment are games I'm eager to start at some point soon. I've been saving them for a rainy day where I can give them the attention they deserve. The Persona series holds a dear place in my heart, as not only are they amazing games that hold places in my favorites of all time, but also help me find many of my current closest friends through the community around them. Through my time with the Persona games, I became more and more aware of the SMT series proper, and added it to the ever-increasing backlog of games I would eventually get to. To be quite honest though, I didn't know when I would. As anyone with a backlog knows, organizing it is a fool's errand. Then, near the end of May, I was on call with one of my good friends, who I considered to be an SMT aficionado. Through him, I had learned many in-jokes of the series, and he had even gotten some of our other friends to play some of the series. So, as a joke, I started up Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne and began to stream, mainly just to get a funny reaction out of him. The last thing I expected was that this one whim would, over the next month or so, drop me headfirst into the series with no intention of stopping anytime soon. In fact, this journey was so unexpected that I didn't record any of it, so apologies for that. I do, however, have my DMs with my friend saved where I would update him on my progress, which I will show every now and then to demonstrate my raw reactions at the time. I originally wanted to make this one long video covering every game I had played, but for now this video will just cover SMT3. However, the games I have played and plan on covering in the future videos are these: SMT3, SMT4, SMT4 Apocalypse, SMT1 and 2, and SMT5 Vengeance. I did one playthrough of each game with the endings listed, and then watched the rest online to get a full picture of the game. The only exception to this is SMT1 and 2, of which I watched a YouTube recap by Marsh on each, as I couldn't figure out how to get an English patch to work at that point, and I was very eager to get to SMT5 Vengeance. Once I cover each game, I will place it in my overall SMT series ranking. The ranking before this journey with just the Persona games I played goes like this from most to least favorite: Persona 3 Reload, Persona 5 Royal, Persona 4 Golden, Persona 5 Tactica, and Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. So, without further ado, let's start with Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne.
Ooh, that's good news. Thank you, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne.
Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne originally launched for the PS2 in Japan in 2003, with an international release with more content launching in 2004. I played this game through 2021's SMT3 Nocturne Remastered for modern platforms, and I achieved the Maniac's True Demon ending, for those that make sense to. The game opens in 2003 Japan, with your main character and two friends, Chiaki and Usamu, being called by your teacher, Yuko Takao, to a hospital in Shinjuku for an unknown reason. Before arriving, you meet occult tabloid journalist Joji Hijiri, who reveals that a standoff between two cults in Yoyogi Park supposedly ended in the summoning of a demon, and that the hospital is connected to the incident. Arriving, you find the hospital entirely abandoned. Investigating the basement reveals a sinister man named Hikawa working with Yuko, who in turn reveals an event known as the Conception is about to occur, which will end the world and kill everyone except those in the hospital. Before you can even process that idea, it comes to pass, creating a post-apocalyptic wasteland roamed by demons. In the chaos, a mysterious young boy and an old woman infuse you with a strange bug called a Magatama, turning you into a half-demon yourself, the Demi-Fiend. It's definitely a packed opening, one that raises a myriad of questions while dumping our protagonist into the destroyed Tokyo in search of answers. It really hooked me personally, as one of my favorite story types are the ones that front-load you with those kinds of questions. The ones that make a world feel thought out, and instead of explaining everything to you, immediately asks you to take initiative to figure it out yourself. Not only does Nocturne throw you into a story like this, but it does the same thing with its gameplay. I had heard the jokes about title screening in SMT before, but experiencing it for myself was a whole other thing entirely. While many of the same bones from the Persona games I played were there, the muscles of the game were designed to create an altogether different beast. One of the hallmarks of the SMT series as a comprehensive whole is the battle system, where you and a party of demons will take turns utilizing specific attacks to target your opponent's weaknesses, based typically on elemental affinities. Persona fans will be familiar with those games' One More system, where hitting one of those weaknesses will allow you to attack one more time with a character to attempt another similar feat. Where Nocturne, and all the other games we'll be talking about in this series, really shine with is a take on this system that, in my opinion, is so good it makes me wonder why the One More system even exists at all if this was already made in 2003. I'm talking of course about the press turn system, which, while it evolves in later games, still shines brightly here. Concept is similar to the One More system, where your team will start with 4 turns and hitting a weakness will allow you to act again once, but whereas that system is more based around team combos, the press turn system takes things further to apply a few small but monumental changes to combat as a whole. Say you have your 4 turns, and on your first, deal a weakness or critical attack to an opponent. With the press turn system, this will only utilize half of that 1 turn, leaving 3 full turns and 1 extra half turn to use. If you then, on your next action, hit another weakness or critical, your next full turn will also be converted to a half turn. These half turns cannot be further exploited for more turns and will go away no matter what you do if used without a full turn, but this means that you can, if optimal with your actions, have a maximum of 8 actions per team turn. Where things get really interesting and take this system from good to great is that this logic not only applies to your team, but also your opponents. If you walk into a fight with your weaknesses fully open to your enemies, they can also use extra press turns to deal more damage. The stage is now set in every battle for you to really weigh your options and strategies against your opponents, but things are taken even further with this next edition. Say your opponent is attacking you and either misses you entirely, or the damage is nullified by your character's affinities. That forward thinking and planning has suddenly paid off, because anytime that happens, whoever attacked can kiss 2 of their press turns goodbye as a penalty. Even better, if you reflect or absorb that damage, the rest of the attacking team's full turn is forfeit and you get yours immediately. Once again, this applies to you as a player as well. Should you use a lightning attack on someone who blocks lightning, you just lost 2 turns. If you attack someone who reflects or absorbs what you just did, your entire team turn is gone. It's a beautiful way to reward strategy and fairly punish you if you did something stupid. The press turn system is so good that I even started thinking it was just in the Persona series where it wasn't, because it just made too much sense to me. I was playing the newly released Persona 5X and completely wasted my strategy because I thought I could use 1 more turn than I really could just on instinct. If it wasn't obvious enough, I've grown to really love the SMT combat system. Combined with what we just talked about, the real appeal of the SMT gameplay loop for me is building your party up, thinking you're on top of the world, and then getting in one fight out of nowhere that pushes you to your limits because you can't rely on a basic attack strategy anymore, and you have to beat the boss at their own game. But let's be clear, this system isn't perfect, especially in this game. RNG is a real thing to worry about, especially when you get in a situation that you didn't account for and haven't saved in a while. When you die in an SMT game, you get put back to the title screen and have to reload from your last manual save because there is no autosave. That means you should save regularly and often, because if you're like me and complete an entire boss, only to forget to save and die afterwards somewhere random, you will have to do that boss over again. This is where SMT starts to gain a reputation as Persona but brutal difficulty, which I have to disagree with. If you play these games like you're playing a Persona game, then yeah, it's going to be a real struggle. But what I mainly see from these complaints a lot of the time is a failure to play the game on its own terms and accept what it is. SMT games are not difficult for difficulty's sake, despite what it may feel like sometimes. SMT difficulty reminds me of my experience with Elden Ring for the first time. I got to the first real boss, Margit, and bashed my head against a wall for hours trying to beat him to no avail. But the problem wasn't the boss, it was my approach to it. I wasn't utilizing the game's systems, instead just hitting attack and expecting to win. When I instead learned to level my gear and build my character, I was more than prepared to take on the fellow. Nowhere is this kind of approach to difficulty more apparent than the boss that, from my understanding, acts for most players as the skill gate to the game. I remember my journey up to that point being an interesting one. I had heard the jokes constantly about how hard this game was and how much it would be laughing at me while I title screened over and over. That wasn't really my experience, however. I made my way out of the hospital and into the destroyed Tokyo landscape, searching for some kind of answer to what was going on and where to go from there. I miraculously met up with Hijiri again, who had survived the conception and was investigating what to do as well. He directed me to go seek out Hokawa, the man who was responsible for destroying the world and currently operated the assembly of Nihilo. To get there, I made my way through Ginza and into the subway tunnels, which were now occupied by sentient puppets known as mannequins. By this point, I was maybe 8 to 10 hours into my journey, and while sometimes I would die, I felt like I had a good grasp over how the game functioned and how to get through it. Then, as I made my way toward the end of the Great Underpass, I heard a voice.
The flames of the menorah beckon me to the battlefield. I know not who you are, but if you have a menorah, it is our destiny to fight. Let us duel to the death within my realm, where none can interrupt us.
I had heard about Matador before and have friends who had him end their runs of the game. I thought I would be exempt from that though, as my experience so far had just taught me to be a high enough level to deal with my encounters. The thing about Matador though is that even a high level won't guarantee your success. I love this boss because it taught me a very valuable lesson, that I couldn't just ignore strategy in favor of big attacks. Whereas many might look at him and see difficulty spike, I look at him as a wake-up call. It might be an abrupt switch up for those who aren't fully engaging with the game and were just coasting, but it is a needed one.
Now, let the battle begin! Charge me with all your strength! Your horns cannot pierce my soul!
Matador as a boss has, in essence, two major gimmicks. At the start of the fight, he uses a move called Red Capote to raise his evasion and accuracy 3 ranks, meaning if you don't raise your own or lower his back down, he will just dodge all of your attacks and deal more damage. On top of this, he can utilize party-wide damage wind attacks, so not being weak to that is key, as it will just allow him to wipe you out almost immediately. This deadly duo means that if you just spam attack and do nothing else, you will die almost immediately. Suddenly, party composition, build crafting, and most importantly, buffing and debuffing are no longer suggestions. If you don't actually play the game, you can't play at all. On top of all that, Matador serves as an interesting function to the game, that as an addition to the original one. Matador is one of the fiend enemies in the game who were added into the international release. Facing all of them and completing the additional dungeon they unlock will give you the true demon ending of the game, which was what I was aiming for in my run on my friend's advice. We'll talk more about this additional content in a bit, but it does make me appreciate Matador a little more now, as I now know he was most likely created to give this wake-up call early on to balance things more in terms of the overall gameplay flow. All in all, my only complaint isn't even with the battle itself, but rather the fact that the jog from the safe room to the fight is far too long, and more than once I had to deal with random encounters along the way which lowered my health before the fight itself. After that encounter, I felt I finally had a real grasp on what this game was, and I was loving it. In terms of story, things were finally starting to set themselves up as well. Over the course of the next 20 or so hours, I would learn exactly what was happening to the world, and what the conception is, and how the characters I knew were fitting into it. To put it simply, the idea of the conception comes from the common trope in creation myths of this cycle of rebirth surrounding the universe itself. When a universe's time is up, a conception occurs, where reality itself is rebooted by two factors: the power source of Magatsui and a guiding force called a reason. Magatsui is essentially the lifeblood of reality, and demons feed off it to get stronger. With the world in the state it is right now, this conception Tokyo before a full reboot, Magatsui is being constantly accumulated and gathered to prepare for the process. When a human has a strong enough vision for the world the universe will be rebooted into, combined with enough Magatsui and the assistance of a god, that reason will become the new blueprint for the rebooted universe and will initiate the end of the conception. We learn that Hikawa was a member of the Ring of Gaia cult, and when he learned of this cycle, decided to prematurely initiate it, which we witnessed at the hospital. Hikawa desires his reason to come to pass, a world of stillness along the reason of Shijima, where all passion is eliminated and people become one with the world, completely silent forever. The only roadblock in his plan are the other survivors of the conception, that being Demi-Fiend, Chiaki, and Isamu. While Demi-Fiend's half-demon status prevents him from achieving a reason of his own, the other two slowly awaken to their own, and now the fate of the rebooted universe is caught between these three possible futures. Chiaki decides upon a future for only the strong along the reason of Yosuga, and Isamu resolves for a universe where everyone is entirely alone and unhindered by others, the reason of Musubi. You may have guessed it, but the game's ending depends on who you side with, or any at all. Your actions in alignment will determine the fate of the conception, with the only outlier being that if you completed that additional dungeon I mentioned earlier, you will always be locked into the true demon ending. This brings me to an aspect of the stories of the SMT games that are a bit unique to them, that being the focus on world and concept over individual characters. Despite me talking quite a bit about everyone's motivations and reasons, you don't see any characters other than Demi-Fiend very much in the overall game. The main focus isn't on developing them as people, but rather archetypes for the overall message. This is quite a large difference from the more popular Persona series, which takes almost the polar opposite approach to characters, and there's a pretty big divide on which series people mesh with more. If you know SMT and Persona well enough, you probably know the disastrous IGN SMT5 review that calls the game the edgier, less sociable younger brother of Persona 5, a sentence that physically pains me to read out loud. A big problem in talking about the stories of the SMT games with the popularity of Persona isn't really an issue with either of them, but rather the fact that they're so different in that aspect, but so similar in gameplay fundamentals. Given the massive popularity of Persona and their similarity in one area, not to mention that they were made by the same developer, it makes sense to compare the two. The problem in much of the talk I've seen then boils down to comparing every aspect of the two when it just doesn't apply. The two series certainly share a lot, that much is undeniable, but their approach to story and concepts are done in very different and distinct directions, and to judge one of them based on the fact that it doesn't do the other just seems silly to me. It's like playing Dark Souls and complaining that it didn't have the charm of the Adventures of Cookies and Cream. So I want to be clear where I stand on SMT and where I stand on Persona. I adore Persona's characters and stories, many of which are some of my favorites in fiction. At the same time, the worlds and messages conveyed by the SMT games I've played deeply resonate with me and are ones I will never forget. I love both of them for very different reasons, because they both have unique and uncompromising strengths that, while they don't always align, make both series impeccable. With all of that established, My final opinions on the characters in this game is that they excel at the purpose they serve. They assist the story the game is telling wonderfully by adding to the tone and messaging in a way I haven't seen done too much in games. Characters like Hikawa or even Hijiri are never going to be nominated for the best character arc, but that isn't really what they're here for. They're here as archetypal examples of people and worldviews to tell a story about the concept of cyclical renewal and all of its flaws. To be frank, I don't think giving Hikawa a tragic or emotional backstory would even work in this context, because this just isn't the story or game for it. What Nocturne does well, it masters, and what it isn't aiming for, it doesn't even attempt, because it would just muddy what it is. Now that we are focusing solely on what this game's story is instead of what it isn't, the story becomes, is this story done well on that basis? My answer to that is, like I said earlier, when this game focuses on the concepts and overall feel of the world, they knock it out of the park. But in terms of overall poignancy of the narrative, the final sum of its effectiveness as a story itself, it's nothing overwhelming. And to be completely clear again, that's fine. This game has really hammered home to me how much I can like a game, and despite all of what it does amazingly, the complete product I can't rate higher than about a 7 out of 10. Nocturne is like Die Hard. It's an amazing product, one that sticks with me with great moments and experiences I won't soon forget. It's one that I can bond with others over, and it might even be someone's favorite thing ever. But I don't think anyone can look at Die Hard and put it on the same level as something like The Godfather or Citizen Kane, and that's completely fine. It was never going to be that. It was always going to be a really awesome action movie that will spawn debates till the end of time about if it counts as a Christmas movie. Which it is. Honestly, the biggest difference between the two is that instead of killing Alan Rickman at the end, you get to kill God. Back in the game, the major parties are all at their respective peaks, with each character merging with their respective god to become what they need to recreate the world in their image. With this, the path is finally opened up to Kagatsushi, and everyone begins to make their way there. On your way up the tower, you will fight all of them except whoever you sided with, if anyone at all. Stopping them all, you finally arrive at the peak of the world, face to face with the power of Kagatsushi itself. And let's just say it's a little pissed off that you killed everyone who could recreate the world.
Begone, accursed one! I shall never forgive you for causing the death of the world. My light, searing with anger, shall wipe you from existence!
I said earlier that I was aiming for the true demon ending on this run, and how I would achieve that. But I haven't really gone into detail on what happens in this instance. Like I said earlier, starting after Matador back in the Great Underpass, you will encounter specific new foes called the Fiends. Each one gives you a menorah that allows you to progress further into the labyrinth of Amala, where the mysterious being who turned you into the Demi-Fiend awaits your arrival. What was really interesting about all this new content is how, after every Kalpa section in the dungeon, you're given a cutscene detailing more info on the lore of the game and certain characters. This was more than enough to convince me to do more of these, as some of these are really interesting. For instance, I already talked about Hikawa's rise to power, but we also learned more about Hijiri, the journalist who had previously died at the hands of Isamu. I know I didn't mention that earlier, but this seemed like the best time for it. During the new cutscene, we find out that Hijiri actually didn't survive the conception, and was unknowingly placed in the body of one of the mannequins. The reason for this, we're told, is that Hijiri is actually the reincarnation of someone who committed the ultimate sin, and is cursed to be reborn constantly to atone for what he did. When I found out this for the first time, I was really interested in Hijiri's character, because this seemed really specific and set up for a payoff later in the game. I was wrong, however, as Hijiri has never appeared again in any form of S&T media after this, and never gets any kind of resolution to this reveal. It honestly kinda baffles me, and is one of my only few real complaints about this game. I haven't had many problems with this game so far, and the issues that do exist, I mainly written off due to it being the first real game of its kind, coming out over 2 decades ago, and it being fairly specific in its approach. Problems in mechanics or similar systems don't bother me as much due to this context, mainly because I know from playing more of these games that these are problems that were fixed, thanks to the experience of this game setting the groundwork. This isn't that though, because this is just a dumb loose end that really irritates me, because it has no payoff whatsoever. If it was addressed at all, even in a way I didn't agree with, I would be more lax on it. But it just seems really strange that it's brought up and then they just kind of go, so anyway, Dante from the Devil May Cry series is here, go fight him for a bit.
Nice meeting you, kid. Don't take this too personal.
Speaking of Dante from the Devil May Cry series, let's talk about that for a bit. With the new content in the original re-release happening, Atlus decided to put a familiar face in the game to boost sales and add on to the hype surrounding them. That character was Raido Kizunoha XIV, who was the main character in the hit game Devil Summoner Raido Kizunoha vs. the Soulless Army. The only problem with this is that the game hadn't been localized outside of Japan yet, so no one actually knew who he was outside of that game's player base. And so in the most insane trade deal of all time that will never happen again, the stars aligned and the Capcom gods graced us with the addition of Dante from the Devil May Cry series in his place in the international release. Does it make sense? No. Is that Dante from the universally hated DMC2? Yes. Does he have the exact same moveset as Raido but with different animations? Yes. Does anyone care? Hell no, we have the funny sticker now! It is genuinely hilarious to see the scene where they show off all of the fiends you have to fight, and just randomly there is Mr. Jackpot McDevil Trigger. I was laughing for a good minute when I first saw that. He's a good boss too, and one of the only recruitable party members who comes with Pierce as a skill, which is incredibly useful for the final boss. Anyway, when you finally gather all the menorahs from the increasingly difficult bosses, you're finally granted an audience with the big man himself, revealed to be Lucifer. Lucifer's deal in SMT is interesting, so it's very worth it to go over his motivations in this game and what his end goal is. In the simplest way I can put it, Lucifer's goal in every SMT game is to completely defy any kind of cosmic order, specifically that of God. As more games are released in the SMT series, we'll get a bigger picture on why this is and what order and chaos really mean, but for now in the context of this game, I just want to focus on what his concrete endgame is. He wants to use you, the Demi-Fiend, to kill Kagatsuchi, the thing that endlessly rebirths the universe, in order to free the universe from that mandated cycle. Now, that might sound like a horrible option for you to pick in this game, but considering it is the canon ending and was what I chose, I think it's important to go over what this really means. Right now, the universe is mid-conception, and the only options for how that will end are the original game's endings. You either side with one of the three reasons, which all suck and will create terrible futures, or you end up siding with your late teacher's wishes and go through siding with none of them and abiding by her will, recreating the universe to exactly how it was before the conception. If you fail at doing that through lack of conviction, the world will just be permanently stuck in this mid-conception state infested with demons. The teacher ending, commonly known as the freedom ending, clearly seems to be the good ending of the original game. This new true demon ending is here to reveal the dark undertones to that option. Sure, if you reset the world to exactly how it was, you prevent any of those dark futures from coming to pass. But you'd neglect the root cause of those possibilities in the first place, the current order. Lucifer's goal is to utilize the current situation in order to completely reset the order that gave rise to this situation in the first place, and destroy the cyclical nature of the universe altogether. His argument is that this cycle, governed over by the SMT god, is only just perpetuating this cycle in order to preserve his rule, his eternal order. If you're like me and this is your first introduction to the SMT series, this ending seems pretty up in the air whether you should trust Lucifer or not. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I made the right choice in the end with the true demon ending. I mean, I did just side with the devil. Now that I'm more familiar with the series though, I can confidently say that this is the best option. When I first played this game, I was pretty happy with how this ending, and all of the endings really, aren't black and white and lean heavily into shades of grey in their morality. This is still very true, but now that I'm more familiar with this series and its rules and concepts, I like the true demon ending a lot more for what it sets up and how it shows the series' typical neutral ending through a new lens. With all that in mind, I finally fought the final bosses of the game. Kagatsuchi is really interesting in its phases and really pushed me to my limits, but the real challenge was doing the extra boss that the true demon ending adds right after. Once Kagatsuchi is destroyed and the world is now free from the cycle, Lucifer shows up, ready to enact his plan. The only problem is, he wants to test your conviction first, and so you fight him as your final encounter. This is also a great boss, one that I died to many times due to my already stressed party from fighting another boss immediately beforehand. But eventually, I bested the fallen angel to prove myself, and the game ends on a note of radical change to the established order as we march on to the true final battle.
The time has come. Together, let us march onward. To the final battle, where our true enemy awaits!
Over the course of this video, I've talked a lot about how this game has landed for me, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. This game has cemented itself as an unforgettable start to my time with this franchise, and established so many hallmarks that I've grown to love, even if I can't overall say this is one of the best things ever made. In the end, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is a 10 out of 10 at being a 7 out of 10, and I won't forget it anytime soon. I love this game a lot, even if I love the other entries more than it. It's honestly really hard to place this anywhere in a list because while I love the other games more, this game is undeniably special in its own way. For now, we'll rank it here on my current SMT list. Sure, it hasn't left the same kind of impact as the Persona games have on me, but it was never aiming for that kind of impact. Instead, Nocturne created a doorway into a world that I've been exploring and loving every second of. Thanks so much for watching. I plan on making this a continuing series as I go through this series, so stay tuned next time where I talk about my experience venturing through Naruku in SMT4.